Sir, live please start.
Yeah, very good afternoon, all doctors. Thank you for joining this webinar through DigiNeuro, a digital initiative by Health and Youth Therapeutics, a joint venture with New Link Company Limited, Japan. Health and Youth Therapeutics has a vision of fulfilling unmet medical needs by launching innovative first time in India products. Like we have Amnuride, the first time amitriptyline is combined with mecobalamin with Amnuride 5 milligram, the strength which is not even available with amitriptyline plain, Amnuride 5, Amnuride 10, Amnuride 25. This formulation is designed for diabetic peripheral neuropathy and migraine and tension type of headache. So you have the full range. You can up titrate the dose as per the patient's need. We have also launched for the first time in India a combination of amitriptyline plus propranolol SR for migraine when one drug is not enough. Amnuride Beta 520 ER, Amnuride Beta 1040 ER. We are also the first to combine two neuroanalgesics, amitriptyline plus pregabalin, so that they are pharmacologically suitable to each other. Pregabalin is a BID dose, but if combined with TCS, it becomes OD. But what we have done is pregabalin is given in a sustained release form to match pharmacokinetic profile of amitriptyline, so that your patient can get 24 hours relief with just one dose at night. So Amnuride P for severe neuropathic pain. We also have a mecobalamin injection imported from Japan to offer your patients highest quality, so that they get 100% mecobalamin when you inject. This is the only one and only made in Japan mecobalamin injection. Then we further innovated. We launched 2.5 milligram strength of clobazam for the first time in India to offer you a lot of flexibility and control in epilepsy patients, so that you can up titrate the dose starting with 2.5, 5 and 10, or you can down titrate up to 2.5 milligram and dead taper the dose, or you can use Adclobaz 2.5, 5, 10 in BID dosing. So in step-ladder treatment of epilepsy, I am sure Adclobaz you will find it very useful, adds flexibility, adds control. Very soon we are launching yet another concept, vitamin therapy for migraine, Brentamin. Brentamin contains riboflavin 200 milligram, magnesium 200 milligram, and CoQ10 10 milligram tablet. This is again first time. This is supported by American Academy of Neurology and Headache Consortium, that this therapy is as good as therapy given with conventional therapy. So you can give Brentamin as a supportive therapy along with conventional therapy in pregnancy migraine, and also in school-going children where you would not like to start with conventional therapy because it might interfere into their school performance. So very soon we are launching Brentamin. With your support and with your guidance, we would like to launch many more new products like this. Now, for today's webinar, we have Sir Dr. Apurva Puranik, well-known leading neurologist of the country, very well known for his research work on aphasia. Last time we had 2 series of aphasia webinar, and we had a record login. 1,275 doctors from across the country logged in for those webinars. And today also I am very happy that before we started this webinar, we already had more than 220 pre-registration for this webinar, and the numbers will now climb up as we start this webinar. So we are very happy to welcome, very privileged to welcome Dr. Apurva Puranik sir for this webinar, and thank him for giving us this opportunity to carry this webinar. Today we have a special coordinator, Dr. Nandini Singh, a cognitive neuroscientist from UNESCO MGIEP, New Delhi. Madam has a permanent position as Professor, National Brain Research Center, Manesar, and currently she is a program specialist in science of learning on deputation in UNESCO MGIEP program. Madam has done several research, and she has research interest in socio-emotional learning, reading and dyslexia, music and speech therapy in autism, emotion and music, especially focus in North Indian classical ragas. Madam has also published a book on dyslexia assessment for language of India, and she has contributed to many more research papers and contributed to science and policy in reading and dyslexia, music and autism and music. So we are very fortunate and happy that Dr. Nandini Singh will be coordinating this session with Dr. Apurva Puranik as our speaker. Over to you, madam. Please carry on.
Everybody, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Apurva Puranik today. He is a man of many talents and virtues and has had a very illustrious career spanning almost 37 years in neurology. I think almost all of you who are in the audience today are very familiar with his work in aphasia and his contribution to the field of neurology, and are aware that he is well known not just in the city of Indore, but across India and across many international platforms. Almost single-handedly, he has been pushing and promoting the cause for bilingual aphasia and trying to make a case for how much work from India can actually come forth to inform this. And I think that's what sets him apart, in the sense he's been trying to bring into the field the relevance of developing batteries and assessment tools which are developed in India, indigenous to India, and are relevant for the Indian population. And I think that's where Dr. Puranik and I share a common bond and a passion, where we both are also very interested, particularly in the field of reading and writing disorders. And I particularly feel that a synergy between the research and the clinical field will prove to be extremely beneficial, not just in understanding how the brain processes multiple languages and multiple writing systems, the value of the written word besides the spoken word, how important that is in trying to understand brain development and brain plasticity, and how aphasias can begin to inform dyslexia, and how dyslexia can begin to inform aphasia. I think it is time that such work now began in India. We have tremendous facilities, and it's time to start out a new research paradigm where researchers and doctors, neurologists particularly, work hand in hand to do so. And I'm hoping this discussion which Dr. Puranik will do today on reading and writing disorders will light a spark in many of the people listening to this and will set up a new paradigm. Dr. Puranik, over to you.
Namaskar. Thank you, Nandini, for kind words. And thank you, Mr. Deepak Naik, for giving yet another opportunity to share this platform. I'm also thankful to all those who have logged in and are listening to this presentation. So I shall be sharing my screen, and is it visible? My slide is visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible, sir.
Now I start. Clinical assessment and treatment of disorders of reading and writing. Why this subject is important? Number one, magnitude of problem. Acquired disorders of reading and writing are mainly after stroke and brain injury, which themselves are quite common. And 25 to 30% of brain injury may have aphasia, and about half of those persons with aphasia may have significant disability in reading and writing. That's the acquired part. When we come to the developmental disorders of reading and writing, there are learning disabilities, there are more broader types of mental retardation with or without cerebral palsy, and their prevalence in general population is ranging from 5 to 10%. So that is the main reason why this subject is important. It's a huge percentage, huge number in a country like India. Secondly, the life is so much dependent upon reading and writing. So now it is not possible to have a productive and a meaningful life without these skills. And a lot can be done by way of therapy and rehabilitation if we have better understanding of disorders of reading and writing. And unfortunately, there is a big treatment gap between what is known, what can be done, and what is really being done on the ground. And thirdly, this subject is important for theoretical and research issues because it leads us to better understand the organization of symbols and sounds and meanings in the brain, and also the computational language processing. The subject is also important, as they say, art for the sake of art, so we can say science for the sake of science. A detailed profile of these persons' skills in reading and writing at a baseline and follow-up is necessary. Clinico-anatomical correlations are also illuminating to understand the organization of these functions in brain. Therapeutic interventions, how to help these children and adults with reading and writing disorders, they are guided by detailed profiling and syndromic classification, and also for prognostication. These disorders of reading and writing can be developmental and can be acquired, as I just now hinted. The developmental ones are called dyslexia and dysgraphia. They are present since early childhood. They are a type of learning disability, and they usually remain static lifelong. They don't go away. While the acquired disorders, we commonly use the term alexia and agraphia. They can occur at any later age. Naturally, strokes are occurring in late age, but they can occur in young age also. In these subjects, the initial premorbid functions are normal. A partial natural recovery is possible in stroke and traumatic brain injury, but not in dementias. These developmental and acquired disorders of reading and writing share many similarities. They can improve by therapy. Rehabilitation is possible to a variable extent. Other cognitive functions may or may not be affected. The pathophysiological modeling, the assessment methods, and the therapy tools may be similar for both the groups to a great extent. How this reading and writing started has an interesting history. In the time of Socrates, the Greek alphabet was just being discovered or just being developed, and he had a sort of negative thinking about reading and writing skills. He had doubt. He said, like our Vedic Vachik Parampara, the knowledge is to be imparted by speech, and it has to go into the mind of the brain by listening. And he said that you become a slave of printed word, that's nothing good. His pupil, Plato, was a bit ambivalent. He was of a younger generation, and he couldn't say no to his master, Socrates. So he quietly kept writing his sayings, and later on, they were immortalized in the writings of Plato. By the time of Aristotle, the reading and writing had become habit. So this is how, whenever a new human cognitive development occurs, and when it leads to a new technology, there will always be a part of the society which will be resisting that development, and there will always be a part of the population which would be early grabber of that technology. So Plato was an early grabber. In terms of evolution, brain was never meant to read. There are no genes, no biological structures which are specific only to reading. Each brain must learn to make new circuits by connecting older regions which were originally designed and genetically programmed for other things, for recognizing objects and retrieving their names. So instead of objects, once we had that infrastructure of recognizing and naming the objects, we applied that infrastructure to printed words and letters and phrases and sentences. So this is an epiphenomena. Reading disorders cannot be something like a flaw in a brain's reading center. There's no reading center. So that is the basic thing. And as we often say, ontogeny repeats phylogeny. It took our ancestors about 2000 years to develop an alphabetic code. And we are expecting our children to crack that code in about 2000 days, that is around 6 to 7 years. All of us are having variable skills for various things, and we call it a normal distribution or Gaussian curve. It is applicable to IQ, to music, to calculation, to numeracy and all those things. So similarly, our reading skills are, majority of the population is in between. On one end, there are super readers, we call them hyperlexics. And on the other end, we have sublexics or dyslexics or alexics. So we don't call them abnormal. It is a part of a normal distribution. The neurobiology of reading and writing starts from genetic foundations. We are now understanding that there are not a single gene, but a group of genes which have variable bearing upon the development of those parts of the brain, those circuits of the brain, which are concerned with speech, language, calculation, mathematical skills, reading and writing. So those genes are leading to formation of neural structures, and ultimately they lead to perceptual, motor, conceptual, linguistic processes, and at a behavioral level, it is seen in the form of reading and writing. So it starts from the genetic foundations. We don't believe in blank slate theory. Every brain is born with something inborn. Of course, there is an equal role of nature and nurture. This slate, which is already written, is shown in the form of brain structure and symmetry. In most of the right-handed people, the left planum temporale is larger on the left cerebral hemisphere as compared to the right. The process of reading starts in the occipital lobe, known as striate and extrastriate cortex, where the visual features of printed symbols are recognized. Then it goes to the mid-fusiform gyrus on the inferior surface of the temporo-occipital junction, where the visual representation of words are present, the orthographic lexicon. Then it goes to the left superior temporal gyrus and dorsal inferior frontal cortical areas, where the phonological, much anterior part of the brain, where the phonological processing of retrieving and assembly of the sound structures of words is done. In between, there is the left anterior and middle temporal gyrus, where the semantic processing, the meaning processing. So in the back part of the brain, the visual part and the word recognition in the orthographic form. In the anterior part, in the frontal lobe, the phonological, how the sound would come. In the middle, in the temporal part, the meaning part, the semantic processing. And the left inferior parietal cortex will be having a supportive function for the storage and a tertiary association cortex area for joining all of them in association with the working memory. So that was the neurobiological substrate for the reading function. The alexias or reading disorders can be classified based on neuroimaging and anatomy. And there is another way of classifying them, which is based on computational models. I will briefly touch upon the two. The differential features based on neuroimaging and brain anatomy are, we have parieto-temporal disorder, we have occipital disorder, and we have frontal disorder. In the parieto-temporal, the reading is total alexia. There is a severe agraphia, only copying may be possible, which is slavish. There is anomia for letters. The comprehension of a spoken word is, spelled words is failed, and spelling aloud is also failed. This is a very severe alexia, which is often seen in association with aphasias. Occipital alexias can occur without aphasia because it is a posteriorly placed lesion in the dominant hemisphere. They will have primarily verbal alexia. Writing function would be preserved, copying would be preserved, letter naming would be preserved, comprehension of oral spelling and spelling aloud would be preserved. And coming to the frontal lobe, again, it would be literal reading, word to words, letter to letter reading. Writing would be severely impaired because the motor functions are also affected. Copying is also affected because frontal lobe are concerned with the motor function. Letter naming is affected. So it's again a severe variety of alexia. So this is the neuroanatomical or neuroimaging based, and I will gloss over some of these imaging pictures. I will not go into details to save on some of the time. So this is a lesion in the parietal lobe. This is a lesion in the parieto-occipital area. This is a lesion in the frontotemporal, mainly leading to agraphia. This is a lesion more posteriorly placed in the occipital lobe. So that's how we anatomically locate them. But that's not the only classification. When we talk of localization of deficit in reading and writing disorders, there is another localization, not in terms of neuroanatomy, but in terms of box and arrow diagrams. And this is how a conceptual understanding of reading and writing has to be there. Let us pay attention to written input in this diagram. So if some printed matter is there on a paper, first of all, it will go into the occipital lobe in the form of a visual orthographic system. That system is able to differentiate one symbol from another. No meaning, nothing. Then it goes to the orthographic input lexicon, where these combination of symbols are recognized as units. The units in the form of syllables or words. That is called orthographic input lexicon. Same thing is occurring on the auditory side. And then both streams can join in the semantic system, where the meaning aspect and the association aspects are taken care of. But apart from this, there are many jumps and bypasses. For example, if something is occurring on the listening side, on the auditory side, it can jump to the written output, orthographic. So suppose I'm dictating you and you don't know the meaning of that word, but you can write, because if you know the phoneme to grapheme rule, how a sound can be converted into a symbol or a grapheme. So that's one jump. Another jump is on the written side. Suppose you are seeing some word written in French. You don't know French, but because you know the rules of English, you will try to make a pronunciation of that French word without knowing the meaning, bypassing the semantic system, and this is known as grapheme to phoneme conversion. So these systems are also inbuilt in our brain. And there is another one from the visual side. You can directly go to the written output and directly go to the phonological output. And another crossing from the auditory side, you can go to the written side. So all these sorts of jumps and bypasses are present in our reading and writing functions. I should emphasize here that phonology is a very important part of assessment of reading and writing disorders. The reading ability is greatly influenced by phonological processing skills. When a child is growing and he is listening to the sounds of the language around him, whatever language is spoken being around him, those sounds are fragmented, they are segmented into clunks or into chunks of phonology. And that chunking is done in the child's brain as he is listening to the sounds. And then later on he would realize these components are making my mother tongue or my mother language. And when he starts the literacy skills, he should have good phonological grasp of his own language. Then only he would be able to combine this phonological chunk resembles this orthographic chunk. So the children with dyslexia often have problem with phonology itself or its conversion into the graphology. We'll come to that. Phonemic awareness skill is to be imparted to children with dyslexia and also adults with alexia, so that they recognize individual sounds or phonemes in a word. They recognize that the words are comprising of syllables and phoneme. They practice the skills of rhyming and phoneme identification and blending and segregation and manipulation. And they have a short-term phonological memory so as to, like the computer memory of RAM, random access memory, they should hold this temporary storage of information of phonological short-term memory to manipulate this information. Based on this, scientists have been talking of dual root model for reading. And this is applicable to developmental disorders and also to the acquired disorder. So suppose you see a written word, a child or an adult. There are two routes. One route is going through only phonological processing, not paying any attention to the meaning or semantics. In this system, you can even read non-words. What is non-word? A non-word is a pronounceable string of sounds or syllable which don't have any meaning, non-word. But all of us can read non-words. Some children with dyslexia and many adults with alexia, particularly one variety of alexia, and I will come to that, they have great difficulty in reading non-words and irregular words and exception words. Of course, in Indian scripts, we don't have irregular words and exception words because in them, that particular root might be damaged. In neurology, this is very interesting. And we call it the rule of dissociation. Dissociation means the brain pathology can be so discrete, so localized that it can damage one of the pathways in our box and arrow models and not the other. So many types of dissociations and associations have been described in literature of neurolinguistics, coming to the disorders of reading and also disorders of speech and language, that is aphasia. So this is the one root, the grapheme, phoneme, conversion root, the phonological root. The other root is very interesting. Here, they recognize that word like a symbol. Have you heard, and you must have all known about the Chinese script. The Chinese script is very complicated symbols, and each symbol is like an image, like a picture. So these people learn these words not through the sound. They just recognize the word as such like an image. And all of us do that. Even if in our Devanagari script or Roman script or Latin script, apart from the phonological root, all of us also rely on the lexical root, in which the words which have been learned by practice, including the exception words, like the English spelling of kernel, C-O-L-O-N-E-L. So it might be flouting the phonological root, but we have learned it that it has to be pronounced that in that manner, and it carries this meaning. So this is the lexical root. The lexical processing goes to the cognitive dictionary, and it is having a direct bearing with the semantic processing. So it is possible in acquired as well as developmental disorders to have damage more to one root as compared to the other root, and vice versa. So there is one variety of dyslexia known as surface dyslexia, in which the lexical root is damaged, and these people cannot produce exception words because they do not follow those exception words. The phonological dyslexia, here the non-lexical root is damaged, but the phonological root is preserved, and they cannot produce non-words. So these are the computational models. Same thing, we differentiate. Deep dyslexia is a type of phonological dyslexia in which parallaxias are produced. We call them semantic parallaxias. That means if they are asked to read a word, they will produce a parallaxia. Suppose they are asked to read a word, printed word, ghoda. So now when you ask them to read, they won't be able to say ghoda. They will say guy. Now it's a semantic parallax. It is a four-legged mammal. So it is related. So this type of errors are made by persons with deep dyslexia. Now we come to the fact of scripts. Why is it important to have a brief understanding of the type of script? Because the classification of dyslexias, the profiling of a person's deficit in a dyslexic patient, and his therapeutic exercises will be guided by the type of script he is working in his everyday life. The scripts with which we are concerned are Latin, which is the Roman script for English, and Devanagari, which is applicable to Hindi and Marathi and Konkani and Nepali and some other Indian languages. Even other Indian scripts, they have derived from Brahmi, so they share many of the common features. So it is not alphabet, it is not purely syllabary like the Kana of Japanese. It is a combination of alpha syllabary, the Devanagari. Here our physical graphic unit is a syllable which can be a vowel or a consonant vowel or consonant vowel. In each consonant, there is a hidden vowel. Basically, when we say ka, it means the ka with halant plus a, then it makes the full consonant ka. And similarly, vowels can follow the consonant, and in that case, the vowels will not have an independent marker, they would be having in the form of diacritic marks. And vowels can occur independently also in a stand-alone position, and consonants can occur in their halant forms also, and then we can have composite consonants also. So Indian scripts, particularly Devanagari scripts, while we take a pride that they are so scientific, of course they are scientific, and they are so transparent, of course they are transparent, but Dr. Nandini would tell you maybe in comments that they put a greater stress, if you do not want to use the word stress, they engage a larger part of the brain in reading and writing. So those are the aspects related to the script. Now we come to the clinical assessment of a person with reading and writing disorder. Before you begin, you should inquire about the language proficiency, how many languages he is proficient and literate, the handedness, the other cognitive functions, the visual acuity should be tested and corrected, eyeglasses should be there, and whatever stimuli we use in assessment of reading and writing function, the print size should be fairly large. These are many tools of assessment of reading and writing function. There are many. I apologize that there are many more assessment tools developed by Indian scientists. They are not here on this test. And one standard one is PALPA, which is from outside the country. In our country, we have DALI, developed by none other than Professor Nandini Chatterjee Singh. At Indore, we have one HRBIT, and at All India Institute of Speech and Hearing, there is MANIT. So I will briefly cover them. This is MANIT from Mysore. I am glossing over it. DALI, Dyslexia Assessment in Languages of India in 4 Indian languages, was brought out by Dr. Nandini, and they have also a screening app. It is applicable for dyslexia screening in school-going children for the screening purpose. The one which we developed at Indore, I will devote slightly more time, but I will basically enumerate what aspects of reading and writing assessment have to be covered in any battery. So HRBIT is not unique. It is everything is influenced by whatever you are learning from other batteries. So then we begin with minimum pair auditory discrimination, because at the very beginning level, you want to know whether the person's listening and seeing, they are able to differentiate the two things or not. So we ask the patient, I am going to speak 2 words and you have to tell me, are they same or different? Ghar and ghar. Is it same? Oh yes, they are same. Ghar, ghar. No, they are different. And then you go on asking. Same thing is applicable to letters. And you give these cards to read. Here is a letter, Darya, Dalia. Are these 2 words same in a printed manner? Oh, they are different. There is some difference. Sundar, Sundar. They are written slightly differently, but they are pronounceable same. Chanchal, Chanchal. Prakash, Prakas. Nasa is different from Shah. So this is how you are recognizing at the abstract level. Then you ask them to read aloud a word list. Reading aloud is a very basic beginning test of reading. You start with high imageability words, then you go to low imageability words, which are abstract nouns and less common words, and then you go to function words, which are grammatical words. You keep on asking, read aloud, jor se bol kar padho. You ask them, read aloud non-word. Now these are words which are not existing in Hindi language, and a person should be able to read. One variety of dyslexia and alexia will fail in reading, while the other variety will be able to read them. You ask them word and non-word judgment. You say, ये आपके सामने एक सूची है, इसमें से आपको छांटना है कि कौन सा शब्द सच में होता है, कौन सा शब्द अपनी भाषा में नहीं होता है, and he has to tick mark. This is a test of orthographic input lexicon at that level. So the first test was orthographic input discriminator and input buffer. Now this is input lexicon. And then This is also related to phoneme to grapheme relationship. You will say, I am going to speak a word and here are 5 options. You have to say, where is it? I say, इस लाइन में जहाज कहाँ लिखा है, and he has to put his finger on जहाज. दूसरी लाइन में तालाब कहाँ लिखा है, he has to put his finger on तालाब. And there are 4 distractors. They will tend to deviate his attention. Comprehension of oral spelling, I will say, क में आ की मात्रा, उसके बाद क में बड़े की मात्रा, बताओ कौन सा शब्द बना. He is only listening and he has to say kaki. Or I will say comprehension of oral spelling. These are non-words. The first one was true words. This is non-words. And then I will ask him, I will give him the word and I will say, आप इसे कैसे लिखेंगे? चूड़ी. So he will say, सर हम च में बड़े ओ की मात्रा लगाएंगे. लिखना कुछ नहीं, बोल के बताना है. फिर ल के नीचे बिंदु लगाएंगे और उसमें बड़ी की मात्रा लगाएंगे. These are all tests of auditory assessment. Spelling aloud of non-words. Matching one word with the picture. So I will say, here is one word. लिखना इन 4 शब्द चित्रों में से कौन से शब्द से वो मेल खाता है. Or one picture and 4 words. 1 sentence and 4 pictures, 4 sentence and 1 picture. All these are matching picture and sentence, matching picture, and then we come to reading comprehension of commands. 1-step command. Here the person has to read. Nobody is speaking to him. He has to read on a card. Now in this slide I have written many commands. When we test the patient, we print 1 command per card. All commands are not given on the same card. So we keep on changing the cards, shuffling the cards. And he has to follow the command. Not only follow, he has to execute the command. 1-step command, 2-step command, 3-step command. And there are silly yes-no questions. We tell the patient, I am going to ask you some childish questions. You have to listen carefully. No, you have to read carefully because we are testing reading function. The same is applicable to auditory testing also. So he will read 1 card at a time. क्या पत्थर पानी में तैरता है? And he has to say no. These are very simple questions. But this is a test of reading comprehension. We can make it a paragraph, a small paragraph, a long paragraph, and we can ask the questions based. And there can be fill in the blanks. So there is a sentence with a blank, and there are 4 options beneath that. The person has to read silently or maybe reading aloud, but he has to choose the correct answer for fill in the blanks. And gradually we increase the difficulty. Then we also give them tests of transliteration from one script to another. I have found this particularly, and I have normative data for all these tests. I have found this to be a very good assessment of phoneme to grapheme conversion and grapheme to phoneme conversion at the diagnostic assessment level and later at the therapeutic rehabilitation level also. So I will give him a word like Chinti and I will ask him, particularly those who are bilingual, those who know Hindi as well as English fairly well, I will give them this command. Now you write down Chinti in Roman. Now these are all Hindi words and he has to write them in Roman. This is a very good exercise. And same thing, I have given them the words, the Hindi words in Roman script. Bimar, Kapda, Darjan, Koila, and he has to write them in Devanagari script. And I give him the English words in Roman script and I ask him to write them in Devanagari. So he has to write down food and care here in Devanagari script. And same here, the stimulus is there and he has to, the English words are there in Devanagari script and he has to write them in Roman script. And then the practice for shapes and copying of letters and non-words is also now coming to the writing practice. So copying it starts, then writing to dictation from simple to difficult. And then finally we give them, I have a set of pictures created for me by a very accomplished senior cartoon artist in the city of Indore, Mr. Devendra Sharma. And I use these picture cards as a part of aphasia assessment, but also I give them whatever is going on in this picture, write on this piece of paper and they have to write down as many sentences as they can for that. We have reading disorders in bilingual and biscriptal subjects, and we look for many types of dissociation. And this has its own opportunities and challenges. I will not go into the details. Professor Pratibha Karanth has given a simile that this opportunity of having biscriptal bilingual patients is an opportunity for Indian scientists to better understand the language organization in human brain. And Nandini would agree with me. It is like Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone was found in an archaeological excavation, probably in Egypt, where one of the king has given his edict in 3 scripts. Only one of the scripts was known to the linguists, but because of that one script, whatever was written in the other could be understood. So we are having Rosetta Stone in India. As now coming briefly to the agraphia and dysgraphia, they are less commonly reported, less commonly complained of. They are less commonly perceived as a crucial need because they are somewhat easier to circumvent. You can speak instead of writing, you can gesture, you can type, you can dictate somebody, and their neurobiology, their assessment, their therapy shares most of the aspects with reading and alexia. Agraphias can be peripheral, can be central. We call them peripheral agraphias when the impairment is in the motor and visual functions involved in writing. Agraphia can occur as a part of apraxia. It can occur in the form of reiterative, so uncontrolled repetition of letters and words. And it can be because of visuospatial, line ऊपर नीचे कर देंगे, शब्द ऊपर नीचे कर देंगे. The lines can go long and long and long, and there can be variable spacing between the letters. So visuospatial function from the parieto-occipital parts of the brain can lead to visuospatial agraphia. These are all peripheral agraphias. And central agraphias are same as alexias, which are seen in aphasia, which are seen in Gertzmann syndrome and surface agraphia and deep agraphia. I will not go into the details. Anagrams can be used in the assessment and spelling practice. Typing can be used, particularly those who are having difficulty in writing. They can overcome their difficulty to some extent by typing, and to improve the writing, many types of devices have been developed by people. Finally, coming to the therapy and rehabilitation of person with alexia and dyslexia. Again, we divide them into peripheral and central. I will not go into the details because this is basically a job for those speech language pathologists who are having a special interest in the rehabilitation and therapy of alexia. The current situation is such that mostly whatever literature we have is mainly descriptive, single case studies. In some syndromes, small trials have been attempted. More systematic investigations are still needed to build a strong theoretical and empirical foundation. However, well-designed single case studies can also play an important role in informing the therapies. These disorders are very, very heterogeneous. So you cannot escape single case studies. One of the methods is known as ORLA, oral reading for language in aphasia. It's a reading treatment for people with aphasia. It focuses on reading full sentences rather than single words. The goal of using sentence instead of single word is to improve the reader's intonation and prosody. And when practicing ORLA, the person with aphasia and his therapist will read out the sentence together. Then gradually the therapist will go into the background and he will encourage the person with aphasia to keep on repetitively reading the sentence till he is able to do it. And this thing is being administered in the absence of a speech language therapist with the help of computerized or digital versions. Oh, there are many, many studies of therapy for reading and writing. I will again not go into the details. I'm showing some of the slides only to give a feel what type of work is being done. For example, in one of the patients, they found that the localization of lesion, not in terms of brain imaging, the localization of lesion in terms of box and arrow model was an orthographic input lexicon. They localized it. So what type of therapy they will go? The therapy was reading of irregular words using pictures and symbol mnemonics. and simultaneous oral spelling of irregular words. So this is how they localize the level of impairment and then they design the therapy task. These therapies are together known as impairment-based therapies. I think in the last seminar on the therapy of aphasia, we emphasized this dichotomy, impairment-based therapy and holistic therapy. Impairment-based therapies, they break down the impairment to a basic unit level. It is known as a reductionist approach. You localize the lesion on the box and arrow model, and then having recognized it, you work upon that. What do we mean by work upon that? That you give him therapeutic practices to improve that function, and also you give therapeutic practices to improve the intact functions, if they can help in overcoming the damaged function. So all these therapies are known as impairment-based therapies. Remember, in the management of aphasia, I said that apart from impairment-based therapies, holistic therapies are equally important or more important. By holistic therapies, I meant life participation approach. That means throwing the baby in the water in the hope that he will start moving the limbs and start learning how to swim. What do we mean in relation to aphasia? Let the person be thrown into the society. Don't keep him isolated. Involve him into conversations. And if he is taking participation in the activities, his recovery of his speech function will come forward, come faster. That is known as life participation approach, the holistic approach, and all those things. Unfortunately, in the I would need the comment from Nandini on this aspect. The children with dyslexia and adults with alexia may not benefit as much from life participation. Simply exposing a dyslexic with lot of printed word, I do not know how much you. I think most of the therapy for reading disorders will have to be impairment based as compared to life part. Of course, there can be some role for life participation, but more role for impairment-based therapy. We published this small paper on effect of reading and writing-based treatment approaches to verbal output. So what does it signify? It signifies that there is a cross-modality transfer of practice. If you make, now this was basically used for a person with aphasia. He was having problem with his verbal output. And we were giving a lot of practice and life participation approach and everything. We thought, let us work on his reading and writing function. That aspect of that person with aphasia was relatively better preserved. So we made him practice a lot of reading and writing. And lo and behold, his verbal output improved. Of course, this is nothing new. There are many such papers and many larger series of such papers in literature. Now, this is a proof of concept. The proof of concept is that if you work on one modality in rehabilitation and therapy in cognitive disorders, including language, including reading and writing, there can be crossover benefit to the neighborhood areas of cognitive functions and linguistic functions. This is something very encouraging in our therapy aspects. To summarize, the reading comprehension treatment in aphasia, this is a systemic review which is published in Aphasiology last year in 2019. And this systematic review could find 15 studies only which fulfilled their inclusion criteria. And a variety of reading comprehension treatments were used. One was oral reading, another was strategy-based, third was cognitive treatment, and fourth was hierarchical reading. I will not go into the details. The quality rating of these 15 studies was highly variable. All of them were not very good quality. And there was some degree of statistical significant improvement in 14 out of 18 individuals. These gains were evident for hierarchical reading treatment administered via computer also. So the authors conclude that reading comprehension treatment have the potential to improve the reading comprehension ability in persons with aphasia. Outcomes are variable, and the future research should focus on participant candidacy and treatment intensity. So the concluding remarks are, when we try to help these people, the children as well as adults, developmental as well as acquired disorders, we try to restore the brain damage. If there is an infarction or a scar in a brain, can we restore? That is known as neurobiological therapies, and I am not talked about them today, though I covered them in the last lecture on aphasia. The second is bypassing the handicap, adaptation. So whatever deficit is there, you agree. So if somebody is having a polio in the leg and he is using the crutches, that crutch is an adaptation, and he is walking with the help of crutches. So similarly, if someone is having handicap in reading, what adaptation we can give to him with the help of digital technology? Of course, we can do impairment-based therapies, and I have given you some examples. I do not know whether holistic, life participation, pragmatic therapies, how much they will help in disorders of reading and writing. And there is a big work going on in the front of artificial intelligence. Some people are worried, some people are more optimistic. What will be the effect of artificial intelligence on human civilization? But we are having some glimpses of brain-computer interface on the horizon. But finally, apart from these 5 things, finally, we have to counsel acceptance and coping. Acceptance and coping. In a literate society, it is true that there is a very high premium on reading and writing skill. But we have to tell, we have to encourage, we have to motivate our children and adults with reading disorder that non-literacy related skills are no less important. There are many famous persons with dyslexia who achieved big success in their life. So if there is a problem with reading and writing, world is not lost. Picasso could create Guernica, or Rodin created Thinker, or Michelangelo created Sistine Chapel. So lot is possible even for a relatively less literate person. This is the message of acceptance and coping. So never stop trying, never stop practicing. Whatever impairment-based therapy and whatever holistic therapy has been prescribed to you, there is nothing like a limited time window. Oh, you have come too late. The maximum recovery occurs in the first 6 months. No, that's not true. Even in a chronic patient, if a proper therapy is given, there can be significant improvement. The improvements will keep coming. There is nothing like a plateau. So the therapy practices have to go on and on and on. At the same time, we must counsel our patients, celebrate what you have, refine and excel in your strength. If nature takes away something by one hand, it gives a lot by the other hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Puranik. That was a fabulous talk, and I'm so impressed at the amount of material you have covered. I mean, this can be like a crash course on dyslexia and aphasia all happening together at one time. So thank you for a very brilliant job. And in the absence of an audience, let me at least provide a clap from my end for you. In terms of the questions, you've addressed many of them, and I will touch upon 1 or 2 which are quite interesting and which I think would be interesting to hear your take on that. Is if you have a child who is hearing impaired or who has a cochlear implant, in such cases, how might one, assessment be carried out? And second, what are implications of this in terms of therapy?
This is a very important issue, but unfortunately, I'm not the right person. I'm not dealing much with the hearing impaired children, and I know that they would have a lot of problem because their phonological awareness would be defective. But I have not done any work. I have not seen, of course, children with hearing impairment do come to me for some other neurological problem. But I'm sorry, I have not dealt with them from this point of view.
So may I attempt some response to that?
Yeah, please.
So, as Dr. Puranik said, there is a lot of emerging work on this. But two things that have certainly emerged in the research are, and they are sort of still in early stages, is to begin to look at writing skills primarily as a means for assessment, and to look at sign language. And in fact, very interestingly, even the therapy is primarily directed towards looking at sign language representations of letters and words, and trying to get children to learn to map the written word from the signed word. So that's a much better circuit to build in, as opposed to worrying about phonology or looking at lip movements, because lip movements can get quite confusing. But if you take of sign language to the written word, that is actually shown to be a lot more beneficial. There is some research on this. If you go on to Google Scholar, you should be able to find that. But this is one area which is very much up for grabs, and we should really think about working on that.
Very amazing. Aphasia in sign language adults. Though I have seen only one person long back, I have not followed any person. I'm also aware that lip reading can be helped in comprehension, auditory comprehension of persons with aphasia.
Yes.
The oral therapy utilizes that route.
Right.
But developmental disorders, I was not aware.
So it's very emerging work, and I think here is something that there's a lot of scope for India to contribute. So I'm going to chip in here and ask you two questions that I have been quite fascinated by, and since I actually have you available here, this is, I think, a great opportunity. Have you, given that so much of our neuroimaging work and our dyslexia work in biliterates seems to indicate very clearly that there are overlapping circuits for reading both languages and both writing systems, with some additional areas being recruited for each. Have you ever encountered a patient with aphasia who has had a reading or a writing problem only in one language and not in the other?
Not purely, but differentially.
Certainly. Perfectly makes sense. Yes.
So, yes, I have come across such patients who had L1, L2 imbalance, and it could be opposite the Pitres rule or opposite the Ribos rule. I have seen all type of patients in aphasia. So,
and the extent of the deficit may be different in the first and the second language.
It was different.
But there was a deficit in both languages.
It was only relative.
Yes.
There was a dissociation in verbal performance on one hand and the written performance on the other hand. So there can be cross dissociation also.
Okay. And a second question, which I think somebody has raised, and somebody which I find very fascinating too, is when you are designing therapy for people with bilingual aphasia, which is the language of choice?
We covered this question in the last lecture, and I will very briefly say that it has to be a joint decision between the person and the family and the therapist. The therapist is not supposed to impose her decision on the person. We have to ask the person their predominant use of language at home, in their own mental thinking and writing, and their work and environment. And we have to ask them, what is your priority? If you go and want to become integrated into society, which language would you like to recover more and faster based on that? And remember, when we say we have chosen this language primarily for therapy, doesn't mean all or none. Doesn't mean that we are neglecting or not doing any work on the other language. Just now I mentioned about the crossover function from one modality to another. the brain plasticity is so amazing and so surprising that working on one language has beneficial effect on the other language and vice versa also.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And I think one of the things which we have found very interesting in dyslexia actually is that because of the challenges of orthography in English, if the first therapy is, and this takes some convincing with parents, it takes quite a lot of convincing that it might be wiser to start out in Hindi or Devanagari or any of the Indian languages which are a lot more transparent, because the whole basis of mapping sound to letter is picked up more easily by the child. Okay, and then the transfer to the second language happens more easily. But a second feature.
Yeah, please complete.
So let me finish. You. And so then we can discuss this a little bit. But a second point which a lot of people tend to ignore is that oral language has a very big role in giving reading a push. Okay, so children, when they start to learn to read, because they speak the language, also benefit a lot from oral language proficiency. Okay, and that actually acts as a very big scaffold in learning to read. Okay, so if you know the language and then you're introduced to learning to read, you sort of get onto it and figure out the whole much better. And then you can take it on to English a little more easily. And so that's one of the reasons. So if you just get the child to focus on one language for a year or a year and a half, in 2 years you find the child is not only doing well in the mother tongue, but is actually doing well in English too. So transfer happens a lot in dyslexia. So your comments on that and its consequences in aphasia, if any.
I wish your comments reach the policymakers at the higher level and lead a change into education policy in our country. I so ardently wish and hope. My comment is that while I take pride in the scientific phoneme, grapheme mapping in Indian scripts, Devanagari included, my pride has been punctured in recent decades as I have seen children in my own family and in my neighborhood who fortunately or unfortunately are being taught both the scripts right from the day one, the Devanagari and Roman. My initial hypothesis was that Indian script being more scientific and shallow or transparent would be easier for children with dyslexia to command, but it is not so in my experience. And I think the reason is they have been introduced too early with the Roman script. That could be the reason. And now when the children are coming to me at the age of 9 and 10 and 11, they are losing in their oral vocabulary of Hindi also.
Hugely. We have just finished some...
They are losing in their oral vocabulary of Hindi. They are not able to read aloud those words in Hindi script. So oral fluency is so important.
It's quite tragic, and we have just finished up a longitudinal study of children across from class 2 to class 7. Okay, same bunch of children we have followed, and the children come from schools which differ in medium of instruction, and medium of instruction we find plays a very big role in language and reading proficiency, which actually shows up only around classes 6th and 7th. And I am on a mission right now to try and convince the government to say that let us go back to reading in the native language. The benefits, not just in literacy and language development, but even in thought, you know, the ability to structure your ideas, to present them, is something that our children need to be able to learn to do. I think this is very strongly. Finally, do you see a role? I'm actually quite excited by the role that technology might offer in terms of building remediation, you know, the notion of practice through games in both aphasia as well as dyslexia. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a cliche to say it's a great opportunity and a great challenge. So we keep on saying these two words together often, but we don't move as much as we should move. That's the tragedy. So I am having great hopes on technology, and I often feel sad on seeing that we take a pride in India being a superpower in information technology and computers, and yet we do not find many companies and many professionals to come and interact with we, the clinicians, to develop such tools. I have been on that for last 10 years, and there have been a few false starts here and there. I'm still into it, and it has a great hope. I'm already working with one of the companies in Bangalore currently. Pray that it fructifies on digital game for persons with aphasia, and that game, if it fructifies, will be helpful for dyslexia also.
Wonderful, wonderful. Maybe we should have a webinar on that, where it's more a discussion on how this synergy can actually be built further. On that note, maybe we can call an end to this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much for this wonderful lecture, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk to you once again.
I'm so glad that you joined and added so much value to it. Great.
So you're very, very kind. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, madam. We have a few more questions, so time is not a constraint. If you would like to take some questions, you can, because I saw that about 50 odd questions were there. Would you like to take some questions, because time is not a constraint, network is not a constraint? Would you like to take, or we close it here?
Look at the questions, many of them are actually being covered by Dr. Puranik in his talk.
Okay, okay.
People have asked about assessment, about what are reading disorders, how do we plan therapy for them. He's discussed most of them, which is why I didn't want to bring them up all over again.
Okay, okay, fine. So, thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful lecture on reading and writing disorders. And I really liked your statement. It has an equal role in nature and nurture. That was quite inspirational. And we need to accept it and cope with it. And when you were talking about this, I found a very interesting, you spoke about Alexia, and Amazon's search engine speaker is called Alexa, which comes with its own artificial intelligence. So that is quite interesting. So thank you so much, sir. We had 672 logins today with 50 plus questions coming in. So such is the response for your lectures, and your followers are following you to understand about aphasia and its treatment. Thank you, madam. It was very, very interesting. You added a lot of flavor to the discussion with your own insights and very insightful questions. Thank you, audience, for logging in today, taking your time out from your busy schedule to attend this webinar. And this is Deepak Naik signing off on behalf of HealthcareU. Please continue to support HealthcareU products and take care of yourself. Thank you for taking care of COVID-19 patients during this pandemic. Thank you very much and have a good night. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Nandini madam. Thank you so much for your presence. Thank you. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Bye.